Any good stories from the road?
Pipe up.
I wish we'd gotten to see a little bit more out of our punter.
I'm starting to puke.
It makes my stomach hurt.
I thought he was going to die.
I'm starting to throw up in my mouth a little bit.
He's on the probiotics.
Is Georgia playing the 1985 Bears this weekend or what?
A lot of Todd talk.
Rat poison proof.
They're mongoose.
We will not be hunted at the University of Georgia. I can promise you that. The hunting that we do will be done from us going the other direction.
Evening, everybody. Wes Blankenship, Palmer Tom's in on the Georgia show tonight. We will talk about Ladd McConkey's own McConaissance. We'll talk about the new stadium plans for Jacksonville as Georgia and Florida. We just talked about it a few days ago. Apparently, you're going to stay down there for a few more years. And there's a lot to talk about with that design for that new stadium as they retrofit TIAA Bank. And we'll wrap things up with a little bit of Q&A from our message board over at DawgsHQ. Palmer, let's start with Ladd McConkey, though. He's made a little bit of a McConaissance this offseason as Jim Nagy was watching some film on the guy and learned something about number 84 that we already know. He's a baller.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We absolutely do know that, having seen him play at an incredibly high level the last two seasons, last year especially being a big part of that passing game. Not that he wasn't in 2021, but I think losing Jermaine Burton and Ladd McConkey becoming a bigger part of that offense in 2022 really helped out his film and helped out his draft stock. And I mean, we were having serious conversations about whether Ladd was going to go 3 and out after redshirting his first year and not playing at all his first year and being a complete afterthought. So that says a lot about the kind of player that he is. Sometimes I think being invited to the Senior Bowl, having to go to the Senior Bowl, I think some people can see that as a knock. But to me, Ladd doesn't have to go. He's proven it in the SEC, and he's probably going to prove it again this year. But I think it's a big testament to the kind of player that he is, that he's receiving this kind of conversation. He's barely 6 feet tall and 185 pounds. You just don't expect that from a guy like Ladd. Drawing all the Patriots wide receivers comparisons.
Well, it could be a Philadelphia Eagle. I think Jim Nagy certainly wants Ladd McConkey to attend the Senior Bowl. Maybe this was his recruiting pitch with this tweet here. But if you're listening audio only, we got the tweet from Nagy up on the screen. And here's what he said. This guy, Georgia football wide receiver Ladd McConkey, generated good discussion among a group of former NFL players during tape study session at day one of Senior Bowl Scout School yesterday. I wonder what Scout School looks like. I wonder how intense that is.
We weren't invited to Scout School.
No, we didn't get to bring our backpacks and brand new pencil boxes to Scout School. But Nagy says, we predict he's far more talented than many people will give him credit for in early stages of pre-draft process, perhaps until they see him up close in Mobile. There's the invitation that I was referring to. Plenty to like on junior tape. High 4.3, low 4.4 play speed, can accelerate and decelerate. I think we can all do that. Gets deep, creates after the catch, outside, inside position flex, sturdy. That's a good trait. Highly competitive blocker. You have to be if you're going to play receiver at Georgia. No doubt. Next level punt return skills. So he says if Ladd McConkey cleans up some untimely drops, he'll have a chance to ascend to top 100 prospect by next April.
Wes, I'll be honest. I did not put punt return together with PR. I was like,
what do you think it was? Public relations?
I was like, he's really good at public relations. I mean, that's the journalism major in me. No, but I mean, having talked to Ladd many times, he's really good with the media, so he probably would be pretty good at PR.
Oh, I don't doubt it. I want to pull up another tweet on top of that one from Terrence Edwards, who quote tweeted Jim Nagy. And if you're not on Twitter, I apologize. This is a lot to keep up with. I understand. But here's what Terrence Edwards, the Dogs great himself, had to say. He said Ladd was a quarterback in high school, and he started training with me to prepare for his transition to wide receiver. The first thing that I noticed was his natural ability to catch the football. He's an athlete, man. I think his drops are a blip, not a trend. And I think we saw that bear to be true throughout Georgia's season. He had a really tough stretch against Kent State. I don't remember if Samford was in there too or not.
No, Samford wasn't in there, but it did feel like he had a couple of drops against Missouri, and that was kind of just everybody in that game.
Yeah, so I think, that's where the bleed over was with some of those drops. But he's such a weapon, man. That Mississippi State game comes to mind to me when he had that end around for like 75 yards or something crazy.
Yes,
and
70-yard rush, 71 yards receiving.
Yeah. I mean, he was dangerous in a game again on the road where Georgia needed him to be dangerous, and it's just a weapon for Georgia's offense. That when you look across the board at the Dogs receivers, now that you have transfer portal additions like Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas, Ladd McConkey is someone with experience, some stability. We'll see what Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint's able to do. And, of course, there's Brock Bowers. But Georgia's receiver room.
He's not too bad.
What's that?
He's not too bad. Brock Bowers, he's pretty good.
Nah, he's solid as well. But I don't know. I found it interesting that the guy that's directing the Senior Bowl is making a note of a dog that around here we know a lot about. And he's had a tremendous career. There were some rumors that maybe he was going to test the NFL draft waters, or I don't know, maybe he was thinking about the portal and some NIL helped him out. I'm totally speculating there. I'm not reporting that, but Georgia is lucky to have Ladd McConkey back one way, shape, or form next season.
No, I mean, I think, going off of the Terrence Edwards comments there, and him being the only 1,000-yard receiver in Georgia history, I've come out and said I think Georgia is going to have one this year. With a quarterback whose skill set probably trends a little bit more that way than it does, being a mobile threat like Stetson was. Not underestimating Carson Beck's athleticism a little bit, but I think he's got a really good arm, and I think that Georgia is going to use that. And I think that Georgia is going to have a 1,000-yard receiver, and I think Ladd McConkey is one of three possibilities for it. Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, and Dominic Lovett. I mean, look at and he got close to it last year. I mean, it wasn't as close as some. Bowers was still ahead of him, but I mean, to finish with 762 yards and 58 catches while Brock was having the season that Brock did.
And while having multiple down games.
Yeah. I mean, 7 touchdowns. And you look at when those touchdowns came, he added 2 touchdowns on rushing attempts too. So 9 touchdowns on the season. Had 2 in the season opener against Oregon. Georgia needed it then. He had a big day against South Carolina, 4 catches, 52 yards. And even amidst a, not so great game against Kent State with fumbles and drops and whatnot, still had 6 catches for 65 yards. So if you're being used in the way that Ladd is being used, you're gonna come across a down game, and you don't want to cough the football up because that can be a killer. But if you're touching it as much as he is, and again, he's not that big of a guy, maybe you're bound to have 1 or 2 or, whatever. But, he emerged out of it with touchdowns in 3 straight games. Again, talking about, when Georgia needed him against Mississippi State. He had 1 against Florida. He had 1 against Tennessee. He had a season high 94 yards in the win over, a then number 1 ranked Tennessee team.
Punt from the Aussie. I'm blanking on his name.
Thorson.
Yep,
the punt.
Brett Thorson flipped the field, and then Georgia should have had a safety, and then Dogs capitalize on that field position right away with the punch to McConkey.
Yeah, I mean, that was incredibly timely. He played, big in the postseason. Obviously, was a little bit banged up there, got hurt in the SEC championship game, and was limited against Ohio State, but had 2 touchdowns in the national championship. I mean, 2 touchdowns and 88 yards on 5 catches. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good ratio there.
Yep.
Hitting on 40% of your touches there, 40% of your catches. So, I mean, I'm expecting big things from him. Athlon has him as a second-team All-SEC preseason player. Pro Football Focus considers him one of the top returning receivers in the country. I certainly think that he can be and will be. Are his stats going to be? I said that he's got a chance for 1,000 yards. He certainly has a chance, but does that mean that he had a bad season if he doesn't? No, because Brock Bowers and Dominic Lovett.
Brock Bowers, Arian Smith, the list goes on and on. It's just good to have stability when you have a change at quarterback and at offensive coordinator. That's hard for me to overlook, and we'll see how it goes. And I know that Bobo's been here before, and it's not like he's totally feeling things out because he was an analyst last year. But when you're replacing an OC and a quarterback in the same season, you got to have a lot of stability elsewhere, and Georgia's lucky to have that. All right, let's take a look at the new Jacksonville Stadium. This is some of the models that they released today, and I think it kind of looks like the Chicago bean and a toilet bowl reproduced, but it's state of the art. There's that bean look there, and they're kind
of a metaphor for the city of Jacksonville.
What's that?
I said that the toilet bowl look might be a little bit of a metaphor for the city of Jacksonville.
I won't say that. All right, you said that. But you can tell they're just widening the footprint of what the stadium will cover, and it's kind of like SoFi, where it's got this retractable roof, it looks like, but it's open air if you want it to be. And I think half of this stadium in a few short years will be half red and half blue. And maybe by the end of the game, it'll be all red on one half of the stadium. But we were wondering, when we were going back and forth, there's that report that Georgia and Florida would go home and home for a couple of years because in 2025 and 2026, you may be needing to get this construction done. You can't have a football game in the middle of all this construction. So I was looking at who is responsible for it, and I was like, how is anyone going to flip this project? I mean, when you look at this thing, man, it looks aggressive.
That's not just renovations. I mean, that is a new stadium because TIAA Bank, formerly known as what was it? Everbank.
Everbank, yeah.
Yeah, there's been a million names there. Those two stadiums don't look alike. I mean, the Jags current stadium and SoFi Stadium might be, the top and the bottom of the NFL. I
see it in the seats, but it's like they're going to wrap everything else around it in state-of-the-art stuff.
Now, the question is, are they still going to have the pool? I don't see it on there.
Oh, great question. Maybe that's the pool back there.
That's got to get addressed. I mean, it's not a Jags game without, a camera shot to the pool.
Do they have – it's a little cool, I guess, for most of those games, Georgia-Florida games. Is the pool working?
Oh, yeah. It's working for those games. I mean,
okay.
It's late October, sometimes early November, but the pool is open. It's alive and well.
All right, well, that's good to hear. The construction company that's leading it is the logo's weird. It looks like it's HOK, H-O-K, but I think it might be H-N-K. And they are the company that built Mercedes-Benz Stadium and also helped out with some of Georgia's recent facilities as well. Let's see, what are they actually called?
It's H-O-K.
H-O-K. All right.
Formerly Helmuth, Obata, and Casabom. and legally HOK Group Incorporated.
I think HOK is a good idea.
Yeah.
After what you just said. Sports and rec. What else? What else have they done? Mercedes-Benz. They did the Hard Rock Stadium modernization. That's the one for me that says, okay, this group can probably pull it off because Hard Rock is old. It's ancient down there in Miami, and they've made it look pretty sweet now. So maybe this is aggressive. I don't know. But it seems like within the next few years, Georgia and Florida will be playing in this state-of-the-art thing that looks to me like a UFO.
Yeah.
We had some Q&A on our message board, Palmer. Before I get to that, though, I'm going to get to the only answer for Georgia apparel. It is breaking tea. And if y'all know us, you know that we love us some breaking tea. Field of Bowers is now up top. What have they done?
Where are the Georgia Dogs?
No, I'm on page 2.
Okay.
Stetson, you're going to have to keep waiting on Stetson stuff. But we just talked about that state-of-the-art Jacksonville Stadium. This is just that national championship logo right here with SoFi in the logo. For some reason, the Indianapolis one was never really jived with that one. But I think this one looks okay. I noticed that a lot of schools are doing it. It's not just Georgia. For whatever reason, they want to incorporate the stadium in the design. So if you like that, if you want to go for that, you can do it. Or you can get the Never Hunted 15-0 with the logo. It's pretty sweet. I don't know what they'll do for Houston. If Georgia wins it, they'll have to incorporate a number 3 in there somehow. So head on over to Breaking Tea. You know you need a new Georgia t-shirt this summer. Stay cool, look cool, wearing Breaking Tea. All right, Palmer, Q&A time. And it's that time of the year. People are starting to wonder what's going on with the Dogs on the recruiting front. You just had commitment this week in Justin Green, but you got some more visits coming. None of those are slowing down. So this Q&A mailbag, if you want to call it that, was open to our premium subscribers only at DawgsHQ.com. If you are not a subscriber there, you can be one for half off of what a year normally costs. So that'll be $50. If you want to be on this board, seeing the things that we answer each and every day, not just on YouTube, and getting the scoop, the updates on the team, and recruiting news from Rusty Manziel and Jake Roos. So I'm just going to go through, and you and I can just kind of hop along and pick and choose some things that we want to answer. And I will start with the biggest uncommitted recruit Georgia has the best shot to land between now and signing day. For me, I'm just going off of what Rusty Manziel's told us. If you're talking about the biggest, he's visiting this week.
Yep.
He's
That's
from
where
Buford,
I'm going.
and his name is KJ Bolden. And I know that seems like a long shot for a lot of people who followed along with Georgia recruiting through the years. You don't get a lot of Buford guys. You don't get a lot of guys out of Gwinnett in general. But this guy seems like he's interested in Georgia. He'll be on campus this week, and he'll have a lot of people with him, a lot of family with him, and they're going to learn everything they want to know from Kirby Smart and Georgia's staff. So I don't know when that'll happen. I don't know if it'll happen, but if I was going to wager, I would say that KJ Bolden, probably the highest rated prospect out there still that Georgia doesn't have a commitment from, that they have a really good shot to land.
No, I'm right there with you, Wes. And, you know, admittedly did a little bit of a spark notes with Roos on the phone before hopping on to prepare for some of these recruiting questions. And that's who he said too. You know, somebody that's been on Georgia's campus quite a bit, you know, a 5-star plus player, you know, somebody that is very, very familiar with what Georgia has to offer. Dogs with a 61.8% chance to land him, according to On3 recruiting prediction machine. A two-way player there at Buford. Go look at his highlights if you haven't. I dove into those a little bit. I guess it was after his unofficial for the scavenger hunt weekend. And really talented player, talented on both sides of the ball. A different player, but in the way that he is exceptional on both sides of the ball, it really reminds me of Travis Hunter. Obviously, it's not necessarily the exact same, but I think that KJ has that kind of presence, for his team. Just, him being out there gives them a really good shot. And I think Georgia's got a really good shot with him. I see, Muschamps reading glasses in the comment section. And I think, Will Muschamp is a big part of recruiting this guy. I mean, you look at Georgia and their safeties in this class. They've got 2 of the top 4, according to the On3 industry rankings, with a really good chance to land KJ Bolden as well, on top of Jalen Hayward and Peyton Woodyard. So the Dogs, they're not backing down from recruiting this secondary and building on what they've already got, where, a position at safety where they've got some really, really good players already. Malachi Starks was a 5-star and a freshman this past year. Janelle Aguero, was a highly rated guy. I don't think he was a 5-star. I think he was just outside of 5-star range in that class of 2023. But the top 50 player, number 3 guy at that position, Georgia lands him, out of Danvers, Massachusetts, but he spent some time down at IMG. So Georgia is making that safety position a priority. You can certainly tell it in that class of 2024. And, I think Will Muschamp and Fran Brown and Kirby Smart, a former safety himself, all those guys kind of work together to recruit the secondary, and it's working.
Yeah, they've got a stout operation recruiting those DBs. Our On3 scouting has KJ as a reminder of Minka Fitzpatrick. KJ Bolden's well-rounded skill set reminds us of Minka. Bolden's size, athleticism, and two-way playmaking ability, similar to Fitzpatrick at the same stage. Fitzpatrick was more of a cornerback at the high school level, while Bolden lines up at safety more often. And then we had this note from our buddy Chad Simmons. He's an elite talent. He's a guy that's a versatile athlete. Some schools like him at safety, some at wide receiver. I think Georgia's going to like him in the secondary. But the fact that he can go both ways like that in a atmosphere and environment like Buford, that gives you a pretty good hint, pretty good clue of what he's got under the hood.
Minka Fitzpatrick, another Kirby Smart recruit, from his time at Alabama. And, with the rumors flying around that Georgia's 5-star plus quarterback commit may be playing for Buford this fall, come on over to the message board to check some of that out. That certainly doesn't hurt their chances. And I know those two spent a lot of time together over the weekend that they were both here in Athens. Dylan, they shared the scavenger hunt weekend. Dylan Raiola here last weekend for his official visit. KJ Bolden coming this weekend.
Two very stout weekends in a row. All right, this is from our guy who just logged on here. Just joined the comments, Matthew C. Who are the bigger whiners about wide receiver injuries, Alabama fans or Ohio State fans? A little bit more fun question. I think it's Alabama fans. And I know there's some recency bias with Ohio State, Marvin Harrison Jr. getting knocked out of the game. Georgia still had what they needed to have in that game to beat Ohio State because they had locked down on him to start the second half. I'm not saying that Georgia wins necessarily if he doesn't get knocked out of the game, but I think Georgia was ready and prepared in the second half, made the adjustments they needed to throughout that game, not just at halftime, to figure out how to shut Marvin Harrison Jr. down. So there's that element of it. There's the reality that Jamison Williams was really carving Georgia up, and that's the reality. However, we've heard more from Alabama fans and still do to this day about Mechie and Jamison Williams injuries. And I think Georgia was in a fine position to win both of those games, the national championship, I'll say. But Alabama fans are having a harder time moving on from what I've seen and heard it anyway.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't help that those Alabama fans have fuel to the fire, having seen how the SEC championship played out. You know, how a full game of Jamison Williams looked like against that Georgia defense. And, you know, he goes down in the second quarter, you know, as opposed to the third with Marvin Harrison. You know, Alabama being down one wide receiver already in Mechie that they lost in the SEC championship. You know, they were down both of their top guys and, you know, having to turn to some younger guys. Whereas Ohio State, you know, you lose Marvin Harrison. Well, you know, you've still got Emeka Egbuka. You've got Julian Fleming. You've got a really talented group. And I think that, you know, if you look at that game, you know, the Peach Bowl against Ohio State, it was a shootout. And Ohio State still scored their points. You know, I don't know how much more you could have scored. You know, and you know, CJ Stroud was doing, you know, amazing things that you saw out of the number 2 draft pick, you know, that you would expect out of a number 2 draft pick in that game. So, you know, I that being said, you know, I think you're probably right there. We've heard a lot from those Alabama fans. I think the biggest difference to me, we've heard a lot from Alabama fans. We haven't necessarily heard as much from Alabama media. And I think we've heard a lot from
That's
Ohio
a good
State
distinction.
media
Because we have heard a lot from Ohio State media.
Yeah, we've heard a lot from Ohio State
and
media,
coaches.
Head coaches. You know, I mean, it was a conversation still, you know, at the combine, running into some of those same guys that we spent some time with in Atlanta. They still brought it up. And, you know, I think if those two teams matched up again this year in the college football playoffs, they'd still bring it up. Versus, I don't know that you're going to hear that brought up from Alabama fans. So Alabama fans, I'll give the in terms of fans, I'll give the advantage to Alabama fans. I think the media crown totally goes to Ohio State.
All right. How about the general pulse on how this year's team stacks up to previous teams at this same point in time? I will say, from what I've heard, there is just incredible depth that continues to get better year after year at every position. But from what I've heard Rusty talk about, this team has way more athleticism from top to bottom. And that's saying a lot, I think, because Georgia's had some pretty athletically talented and gifted teams in years past. When you look at the quarterback room from top to bottom, all those guys they all believe they have a chance to play. Beck, Vandergriff, and Gunner. Last year, I think everyone kind of believed and knew it was Stetson's team unless he went down. So you start at the quarterback room, and it just funnels down from there. You have a lot of you have some hungry running backs now that Kenny McIntosh is gone. You've got guys that not only are talented, but even with Georgia, you know, looking at this three-peat, and you wonder, can the Dogs still be hungry? A lot of players have a lot of reasons to still be hungry because they've been behind guys that have started ahead of them. And then on the line of scrimmage, it starts with Cedric Van Pran, and he is as talented as it comes, and he's got experience, and that is, like I was talking about earlier with Ladd McConkey, that experience up front with Cedric touching the ball to start every single play, and you know what he brings to the table, what he brings to the field, how gifted he is at his position, and how hard he works, and the motivation he has now. playing for Devin Willock. He's mentioned that. He's been on the record about that. And he's just a fantastic leader. On defense, you can't really replace Jalen Carter. But from what we've heard and what we've talked about Nazir Stackhouse, it seems like he's ready to take that challenge on, whether or not he can be a 1-for-1 for Jalen Carter or not. And the linebackers and the defensive backs, that's Kirby Smart's specialty. And they've only gotten better and they've only gotten deeper. So from top to bottom, there's still a hunger there, and there's even more athleticism. I think that's a pretty good combination if you're a Georgia fan.
No, it definitely is. I think when I think about how this team stacks up against other teams in recent years at this point in time, first of all, Georgia has been able, Kirby has been able, and his staffs have been able to stack success on the recruiting trail year after year after year after year. And you're starting to see that, it's not, you expect it now. And so the caliber of recruit that Georgia is bringing in has gotten better and better and better as that's, gone along. Their evaluations are great. And so, I think that the caliber of player that Georgia has, the depth that they have, like you mentioned, it's that much better with this team than it was with the year before and the year before and, on down the line. I also think, they're not replacing 15 players from the NFL draft. They're replacing 10, but, I think that when you look at, who they're replacing and who they're bringing back a lot of experience on this group. You mentioned it, on both sides of the ball. You've got, Brock Bowers, Cedric Van Pran, Lad McConkey, who we talked about earlier. On defense, you've got, a group of defensive linemen. You don't have a Jalen Carter, but you've got a group of defensive linemen that have been around the block a time or two. Zion Logue, Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson. Michael Williams is a freak, and I think that we should expect big things from him, in his sophomore year. Malachi Starks on the back end, freak. You expect big things out of him his sophomore year. Jamon Dumas-Johnson, Smile Munden at inside linebacker. Javon Bullard, Kamari Lassiter in the secondary. These are all guys that made major impacts on the national championship team. And last year, I don't think that you had that quite as much. So I would say that they're in a better spot. Now, obviously, haven't mentioned quarterback, and, that's the big question with this team. But I think because of the ability to recruit, again, I go back to the caliber of player that they're bringing in on an annual basis, and the talent that's around the quarterback. The talent that's around whoever is back there is better than it has ever been before. And so, you combine that with the fact that Georgia is bringing in better quarterbacks than they have before. Let's face it, Carson Beck and Brock Vandegrift and Gunnar Stockton are all better quarterbacks being brought into Georgia than Stetson Bennett was. Stetson Bennett turned into an outstanding player, but he wasn't ready his first year to take over. That took some time. He's admitted that. He was just out there playing football. He didn't really know what he was doing. I think the fact that these guys have spent time in this system, time around a great offensive mind in Todd Monken, who's obviously no longer there, but they stayed within the system and they kept it in, inside the family and brought in Mike Bobo. I think that that's going to help in the transition of the quarterback. So all that being said, I think that Georgia, the general pulse on how this team stacks up to previous teams at the same point in time, I think that they're probably better, but ultimately it doesn't matter until the fall. And, Georgia's got a manageable schedule. They've got a schedule that they can learn, and get experienced. But I think that just looking at this team on June 7th compared to looking at last year's team on June 7th, you're probably a lot more confident.
Yeah, there were a
And-
lot of questions this time last year.
Oh, 100%.
Kirby wanted to use spring to identify who his leaders could be. I think this year you know who they are. You know who those team captains will be any given game. A handful of dudes.
Yeah, 100%, Wes. Now, are we just skipping over the question of is Jake really as bad at hunting and fishing as Guna suggests? Because
do you know the answer to that?
I don't, but I'll say yeah, he's terrible because he can't defend himself.
Yeah, I'm gonna say he's terrible at both. He's probably never caught a fish. I bet his dad has to catch all his fish for him and reel them in.
Yeah, and he poses for the pictures.
We'll get to a couple more recruiting questions here before we wrap up tonight. Which week in June will Georgia fans look back on in December as the biggest recruiting weekend? Maybe I'm a prisoner of the moment here. It's hard for me to look past that first Dylan Raiola weekend where they had the workout at Jefferson. I know Sammy Brown didn't end up in this class, committed to Clemson, but he was up there, and that's why they went over there. And maybe Georgia still reaps some rewards from that anyway. We already saw it with Colton Heinrich. You saw some talent, some committed talent up there as well, working out with Dylan Raiola. So I think that weekend and that week that followed, he picked up 2 tight end commits and an offensive line commit. That week as a whole, man, 3 commits in a week, 2 top tight end talents, and all the buzz of Dylan Raiola coming to campus. It's hard for me to overlook that one.
So that was May, and the question does ask June, but I do agree that if we're looking, if we're looking back at and Roos and I discussed that one as well. For all the same reasons you mentioned, you've got, the 5-star quarterback coming off of his commitment. You bring into town, 2 incredibly talented wide receivers, both that are committed elsewhere. But if Georgia ends up landing either of them, you look at that weekend. Of course, talking about 2024 number 1 wide receiver Jeremiah Smith committed to Ohio State, and 2025 number 1 wide receiver Ryan Williams committed to Alabama. If Georgia lands either one of those, there's no doubt that weekend is the one. But KJ Bolden, who we mentioned earlier, he was there. Like you said, Colton Heinrich and Jaden Riddell, the 2 tight ends, they were there. And both committed shortly after. Marcus Harrison, same thing. On the defensive side of the ball, mentioned Bolden, but I think that, a linebacker that they're trending really, well for in Joseph Phillips from Alabama. He was there. If I'm not mistaken, you had Justin Williams, the number 1 linebacker in the country from Texas. He was also there. And that's somebody that has scheduled an official visit for later this month in June. So that was absolutely the answer. That one is the big weekend. Now,
it feels like this week is the biggest week in June potentially.
If you're narrowing it down to June, ultimately it comes down to, and this is the cop-out answer, but it comes down to who commits. Because if Georgia lands, they already got Justin Green from this past weekend, but if they land Justin Scott or Dylan Stewart or Williams Nawari, any combination of those 2, of those 3, on top of what you've already gotten in Justin Green, that would mean that this past weekend was big. But if you end up landing KJ Bolden or Edric Houston, who's coming to town, Mike Matthews
and Ryan Puglisi's on campus this
and
week too.
I think in the same way that having Dylan Raiola in town has been a draw to some of these kids to talk to, who could be their quarterback. Puglisi's no slouch. These guys respect him. He may not be Dylan Raiola.
I think he's awesome, man. I think he's a rock star.
And so, first of all, Dylan Raiola is going to be talking to these kids before, during, after their visit. He's going to make sure that he's blowing their phones up, making sure that they know Georgia wants him. But having Ryan Puglisi there doesn't hurt. So, ultimately it comes down to who you land. There's a lot more fish in the sea, I think, from this past weekend than there are this coming weekend. But maybe you feel like you've got a better shot at landing, the big fish from this weekend. KJ Bolden, Jordan Ross, Edric Houston, probably not someone that Georgia, the RPM says that they're favored, but the gut feeling probably says that they're not. Probably the same case with Mike Matthews, but obviously, that you feel like you've probably got a better chance with some of those big fish than you do with a, Williams Nawari, who Oklahoma is in heavy on. Justin Scott is no, layup for Georgia. There's some in-state talent that's coming this weekend that could be really big for keeping, building that Georgia wall.
Speaking of Jordan Ross, he will be on his visit, and someone asked if Georgia leads coming into this OV, and I cheated. I asked Jake Roos.
I did.
He said,
well.
Yeah. He said yes. So there's your answer on Jordan Ross, the 4-star edge, and Georgia trying to beat out Tennessee, Florida, and Auburn. A lot of these guys that Georgia have the who's who offer list of SEC rivals: Tennessee, Florida, Auburn, LSU, Bama. So for one reason or another, these visits are big to distinguish yourself from your rivals on the field there. So that's a good sign from Roos if you're following.
And the thing with Jordan Ross, that you've got to keep in mind with him, just like, DeMarcus Riddick, who is a commit, but again, talking about that gut feeling, it's probably not great right now. From Alabama, that makes it really, really hard to, just like it's hard to get a kid out of Georgia. It's really, really hard to get a kid out of Alabama when you've got Nick Saban and his recruiting staff, recruiting guys. Auburn, with some energy and momentum with a new staff. You see them there with the RPM prediction. And, we talk about these SC rivals, and Florida has consistently been, a threat for Georgia and their recruits. I feel like we're starting to see Tennessee a lot more, and that's a credit to Josh Heupel and the success that he's had there early in his tenure and getting some momentum going back in the direction that that they had going for them, in the, late 90s and early 2000s. Obviously struggled there a little bit in the 2010 Derek Dooley, Butch Jones type era. But it feels like Tennessee's starting to get some of that momentum back, and you're seeing it on the recruiting trail.
They've had it recently, but I'll say this. If Georgia keeps beating them, and now this will be the last year where you're guaranteed to see Georgia play Tennessee because of the expanded conference schedules, it feels like Tennessee is going to have a hard time maintaining that momentum unless they keep stealing wins here and there from Bama and Georgia and prove that it's not just a blip. That's what Tennessee's going to have to do. But they are making some strides right now.
And talking about stealing wins, that Florida game has not been, done them any favors. And so that felt like they stole one from Florida. So, obviously those two programs seem to be trending in different directions, but, you got to keep winning that one. You got to keep winning, like you said, Alabama and the Georgia and the LSUs of the world. You got to beat those teams. And that's obviously going to be the case, especially in a new look, no division SEC.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how that split affects things because Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida, historically, all three of them are not good at the same time. It almost just seems like it's impossible. There's not enough room for the three of them in the SEC East. So we'll see what happens when the conference grows and expands. All right, two more before we wrap up. Do you think Tyrion Ingram Dawkins will move to a 3 technique. And what is Georgia's starting wide receiver lineup in the fall? We touched on the wide receivers earlier, but I imagine it will be Ladd, Jack Saint, and Lovett. I mean, are Lovett and Ladd sharing snaps, or is Lovett versatile enough to line up on the field at the same time as Ladd?
They're both versatile enough that they can play inside or outside, and I think that's what makes them. They do have similar skill sets, but in because they have similar skill sets, they can do a little bit of both. And so I do think you'll see those three. Obviously, the question of how involved will Rosemead, Jack Saint be, after his off season. We've seen him in Georgia's video that they posted today at the leadership retreat. He's somebody that's going to be counted on. But if it's not him, then you've got a Dylan Bell who, I know that both of us are big fans of. He's somebody that you expect to step up.
Yeah, maybe Ra Thomas benefits from it.
Ra Thomas absolutely benefits from it because he kind of has that same bigger receiver skill set. And then there's the Arian Smith wild card in there. Is he going to be an every down guy? No, you need to keep him healthy. And because you can't wrap him up in bubble wrap on the field, the way to do that is to not play him every down and to use him, when you need him. Do I think that they will use him more this year in hopes that he can stay healthy? Assuming he stays healthy, yeah. But I do think that starting lineup for wide receivers doesn't matter. They rotate so much. Guys will start games and then play less snaps than guys that are coming off the bench. So those 6 are going to be your guys that you really are counting on. Don't be surprised if a freshman emerges into that group, because Georgia's got a history of that. Certainly with, Dylan Bell last year, George Pickens in the past, Dominic Blaylock in the past, almost called him Dominic Lovett, Dom Blaylock in the past there. Guys like that in recent history and certainly over the, Kirby Smart tenure and even before then, Georgia finds a way for those freshman receivers to make an impact. Very similarly to what they do with the freshman linebackers, flipping things over to the defensive side of the ball there, that they find specific roles for those linebackers, utilizing what they're really good at. So Georgia's going to probably want to do that with some of these wide receivers, and they've got, 3 really talented ones. As far as Ingram Dawkins goes, I do think he probably will move inside some. I don't know if that's going to be – I'll put it this way. I think he plays inside some, but I don't think that that's the only spot that he'll play because Georgia does not have a ton of depth at that true defensive end position. They've got Mykel Williams. They've got Tramel Walthour. That's kind of it. And, Ingram Dawkins can be that kind of a guy and have Jonathan Jefferson and Kristen Miller provide some depth on the interior behind those guys that I mentioned earlier, Zion Logue, Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson, those guys. Jordan Hall is a freak show of a freshman, and he's going to be a part of this. So do I think that he lines up at some points as a 3 technique? Yes. Do I think that that's the only spot that he's going to?
Not like a permanent move.
Exactly. It's not going to be the only spot with these defensive linemen. Trey Scott, they want to keep them fresh and on their toes at each of these positions. So,
well, they cross train at every group, right? I mean, the D line, the O line too, but the linebackers in the secondary, you're not going to see Ingram Dawkins back there lining up a cornerback or anything, but they like to mix it up. One non-football related question. Someone asked, you have an unlimited budget to convince an alien. I don't know where the budget would come into play with the alien, because I don't think they need US dollars. Anyways, you have that budget to convince the alien that one particular restaurant is the best in the world. That's where the budget is. You can
We are
spend as
spending
much
the
as you want to
money
spend.
on the alien to convince them. We're
Got it.
picking up their tab.
I think if I got an alien with me, the tab should be on the house. Where are you taking them, and what are you ordering? I think that if you want to explain to an alien about food and just people, you take them to a Waffle House. I really do think it's that simple. You get a great breakfast. You see some really sweet people. You see some people that are struggling a little bit. You see some people, depending on what time you go in, that are not that sweet. So I think it really is a social experience, and you get some good food while you're at it. So I don't need an unlimited budget for that.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there. Just because on the spot, I'm having a hard time thinking about other places. But I mean, that's a really versatile one. A lot of talking about cross training. You can do a lot of cross training with that menu.
You're cross training. Let's chop some wood really quick. I'm going to let you chop some wood about Georgia's new baseball hire.
Yeah. Announced on Monday, Georgia hires LSU pitching coach Wes Johnson. He will finish the season there in Baton Rouge. LSU's got hosting a super regional against Kentucky this weekend. If they win that, obviously they advance to the final 8 in Omaha. And I think that LSU, they've picked up a little bit of a Bulldog bandwagon here, because I think Georgia fans are going to be absolutely rooting to see LSU have some success, because that's something that Wes Johnson, can sell in recruiting at Georgia. It's not like a football hire where you have to immediately step in and you're recruiting for, immediate impact type guys. With baseball, guys commit at such an early age that there's not the pressing matter that is him getting to Athens and starting to recruit. Now, transfer portal changes that some, and I do think that that's going to be important, but realistically, a lot of those guys that are going into the transfer portal probably aren't doing so until after the NCAA tournament is over. Especially the ones that are playing for good teams, like in LSU. I've talked to a couple of people, in the last 48 hours, putting together a story for tomorrow. Got a good wide variety of perspectives. Talked to somebody that covers him at LSU. Talked to somebody that, played for him at Arkansas. Talked to somebody that coached with him at Dallas Baptist and is now a head coach of his own at a Power 5 school. If you want to do some research there, I'll let y'all put the pieces together there. Not too many options from the 2014 Dallas Baptist staff. But everything that I've heard has been, raving reviews about Wes Johnson. I think that his experience in the SEC, at LSU, at Arkansas, at Mississippi State, not to mention a really good mid-major program in Dallas Baptist, that is going to really help. He's going to have a lot to sell. But I also think that he's got some professional experience to sell too. Was the pitching coach for the Minnesota Twins from 2019 until this past June, when he made an unprecedented move to go straight from. First of all, he made an unprecedented move going straight from Arkansas to major league level. Was the first coach in baseball history to go straight from college to the professional level, but then made another unprecedented move, 3.5 years later, to go straight from MLB down back to the college ranks. Big family guy. He's got family in Arkansas that he wanted to be closer to. He's got a young daughter. So, family is important to him. Friendships, relationships are important to him. For the people that really, have been looking for this, he's a data analytics guy. Do think that Georgia and the new pitching lab that they've got, that's going to be coming in with this new renovation to Foley Field, that's going to be incredible. And I think that he's really going to be able to use that. And overall, I think that, one of the questions that I asked each of the people that I talked to is, hey, why should a Georgia fan be confident that Wes Johnson can be a successful head coach? And there's a lot of reasons. But a lot of it comes back to leadership, his organization. I've got, this is a slam dunk hire for Georgia. And this is that's one quote. And then another quote says, Georgia got itself a winner. And that's kind of all you can ask for in a coaching search.
Yeah, I'm fired up to see it. I know that Georgia fans want to see how he can recruit, and he knows the state of Georgia. He's got a pretty talented dude in his pitching rotation right now that's from the state of Georgia. And Georgia's going to be watching very closely as the Bayou Bengals try to take down the rest of college baseball. I can't wait to see this change, see what he brings to it, and see this reputation he has as almost a mad scientist in pitching, and see what he does leading from the top, see what kind of staff he puts together. I am chopping wood about this deal right here. DawgsHQ's countdown to kickoff summer special, $1 for 3 months or $49.99 for a year.
Half off.
Way cheaper than a Vision Pro from Apple, and you get almost as much information, but it's all information about the Dogs. And it's a great time to do it with all these official visits in June and coming right up and leading right up to fall camp as we approach that in July and August. So jump on that, DawgsHQ.com. Appreciate y'all subscribing to us on YouTube. We'll be back on Sunday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern for a live show, the Georgia Show. And Bark After Dark also airs Mondays at 9 p.m. Palmer, great work tonight. You and me just double duty here. 12 personnel running the show. Good stuff. And we'll see you on Sunday. And y'all have a great weekend. Look forward to what could be the biggest recruiting weekend of June for the Dogs. Stay tuned. See ya.